Hey everyone, welcome to my first proper YouTube video where I will be reviewing this book called Robert Schumann's Advice to Young Musicians, reviewed by the British cellist Steven Isserlis, and I will be sharing some key takeaways that have helped me particularly, and I hope that these takeaways can also help future students applying to colleges, conservatoires, preparing for their auditions or concerts. Just a small caveat before I begin. I have never done a book review, and even a YouTube channel is relatively new to me. So if you were expecting something highly polished, I'm sorry, you're out of luck. But hopefully you find the key tips I share interesting. Let's get into the book review and hope you enjoy this video. The reason I wanted to start with this book as my first book for this channel is because Robert Schumann was a great composer and pianist from the 19th century, and it is really cool that a lot of the advice that he gave his students in the 19th century are still applicable today, and they are greatly beneficial for me and for a number of other students. Schumann was deeply empathetic for students, for younger children in fact, and the English composer Cyril Scott even described Schumann as the true poet of the child's soul. This understanding of a child's nature, of how kids learn, is evident from his compositions also. Compositions like the Kinderscenen and the Album for the Young. Steven Isserlis is a British cellist and a teacher who has worked a lot with kids. He's written compositions for kids, and he has also done numerous masterclasses on Schumann's music. So he is also someone who is a fantastic resource to actually go through Schumann's letters and present them in a small book which is fairly accessible. I would recommend that you go and watch some of his videos on YouTube. They are absolutely hilarious, and just the way he is teaching is so accessible for everyone. I'm just going to link a video here. What's most interesting about this book is that it has been compiled in a way that there's the advice that Schumann has given is all in form of short little nuggets. So instead of having to read a whole novel or a long set work, which can be dense, this book is just a collection of little nuggets of advice. Another thing that I really liked about this edition is that Isserlis has taken the advice that Schumann had and he has categorized them into multiple categories, like on being a musician, playing, practicing, composing, and he's divided those advice into these 4 categories, subcategories, which can actually help make the information a lot more accessible. So if you needed some advice, say on practicing, you could just open this little section on practicing and read those. After having done that, after having categorized Schumann's advice, he's also guided us through that by unpacking the advice. So for instance, the first one I'm going to talk about, Schumann says that respect the old highly, but also take a warm interest in the new. Do not be prejudiced against names unknown to you. And this is something I am particularly guilty of, is that I really like the 20th century pianists, a lot of the old greats, Emil Killels, Alfred Brendel, Wanda Landowska, Glenn Gould, and they are all greats, of course, but it is not fair of me to be prejudiced against the new and more contemporary pianists, given that I belong to the same category. This is also not applicable just for performers, but also composers. We shouldn't be prejudiced or dismissive of the contemporary composers. In fact, Isserlis suggests that we actively participate in discussions with the contemporaries, and he gives an interesting anecdote that if he needs to speak to one of the contemporary composers, he can call them up, write to them, and he would get a response, whereas every single time he's tried to call Haydn or Schubert, they've never responded, and that is extremely rude of them. The second piece of advice I want to share is on the overambitious young musicians. It is good to be overambitious, and that is fair, and as youngsters, we're always keen on wanting to learn new repertoire, difficult repertoire. Okay, I think I like this music a lot, even despite its complexities, despite not understanding how difficult it is. But Schumann advises that endeavor to play easy pieces well and beautifully. That is better than playing difficult pieces badly. And I think this is really good advice for anyone who's growing as a musician. Let me take the example of Bach's Goldberg Variations. It is a fantastic piece of music. It is absolutely one of Bach's greatest pieces of music for the piano. But if we look at it, he wrote that towards the end of his life. It was a very late work when Bach, as a composer, as a harpsichordist, had matured. He'd understood a lot, he'd experienced a lot in his life. So it is the culmination of those years that actually led to a work such as the Goldberg Variations. And a kid who's say 10, 12, 15 even, who's trying to play it, will not, in my opinion, be able to do justice to that great piece of music. So it is better to work through pieces that are more accessible, that are, well, as put it, easy, but it is better to play them well, to the best of our understanding, to the best of our abilities, as opposed to approaching those masterful pieces, those masterworks, and not being able to do justice to them. The last thing I want to talk about is on the idea of practice, and something that is particularly close to me. Schumanns Advice is that when you have done enough for today's work, when you have done your musical day's work and feel tired, do not exert yourself further. It is better to rest than to work without pleasure and vigor. So the idea of rest is extremely important. When preparing for exams, when preparing for auditions for colleges and conservatoires, it is very easy to push yourself to the limit and try to get as much work done as possible in a day. Okay, I'm going to practice 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours a day. But what we often miss is that rest is actually very important. I myself have found that I can practice something for weeks, but if I leave a piece for a day, it just takes time for it to sink in my fingers, in my head, and once I've done enough in a day, it could be, I could maybe on some days even feel tired after 30 minutes of practice. But when that happens, it is always a good idea to take a break, to prevent mindless practice, mindless repetition, so that when we come back to the instrument, when we come back to our practice sessions, we can start with a fresh mind. We can look forward to the next practice rather than being bored, tired and exhausted from our previous practice session. So rest is something that is actually extremely important. Now, just to sum up, we've talked about 3 things. The first is that we need to respect the old, but we can't be prejudiced towards the new, which is new composers, new performers, and our contemporaries basically. The second one we discussed was that we should play the easy pieces well, rather than trying to attack the more difficult ones and not playing them well enough. Or, as Schumann puts it, playing difficult pieces badly. The last one we discussed was on practice, and that once we're tired after a day's work, we should just stop, take rest, take a break, and start again fresh with our next practice session. Just some closing thoughts about this book is that one of the reasons I did like to read this one is because I am someone who finds reading slightly difficult. Reading is not the easiest thing for me. It is slightly challenging for me to focus on just the written word and going pages after pages. So the structure of this book is that every page has a short little piece of advice. It could be a few lines, it could be 1 paragraph, but none of it is really very long. It would not take more than 2 to 3 minutes to go through a page. So I like doing this because every morning before I start my practice or something, I could just open up 1 chapter or any 1 page and just go through one of the sections. So reading this whole thing was not very intimidating, and the language is quite simple. I don't know if that's intentional, or if it is, it's been very well put. Is that because this is advice to young musicians, the words used in this are fairly simple and easily accessible by young students. If you stuck around to the end of the video, thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope you got something of value from this video. I will link the description to the book below. It would be a great gift to any of the young musicians if you are someone who's got a kid or a friend who's learning music, this would be a great gift if you'd want to give it to them, or if you yourself are a musician, it would be a great read for you, and I would highly recommend this book. So thank you. See you next week with another book review. Please let me know in the comment section what your thoughts are, and I will see you again in another video. Thank you. Bye bye.